Hello. Today we're going to review some things that we've been over the past week or so, and also I'm going to give you some new tips to help you with your project one. So we're going to review the whole process of creating a drawing, okay? So the materials you're going to need are, as usual, a viewfinder, your ruler or some sort of straight edge. You're going to need your kneaded eraser and a lighter pencil, like the super light F pencil that might be in your kit, or just one, or you can also just use an HB, the middle pencil if that's all you have, and just put less pressure for your gestures and sighting lines. Also, a darker pencil, so you can use one of the darker pencils with B in its name, so like a 6B, 5B, 4B on the darker range, or you could also use a ebony, Prismacolor ebony pencil, which is really nice and dark as well. This will be using for that final contour when everything's all been worked out and decided at the very last step of your project. Okay, so let's go ahead and turn on the drawing camera. Okay, so the very first step, and this is just from last week when I demonstrated thumbnails a couple of times actually, and so you all have done your thumbnails and even gotten feedback from your peers, so you should be kind of comfortable with this process. So, keep in mind that's always the first thing you do, because it's the best way to decide on your composition, to see what works, what doesn't. You're deciding that placement within the picture plane. It's a very important element of your drawing. So do as many thumbnails as you need to get something that really works for you and you think it's going to be a really great drawing, okay? So you're going to create your thumbnails, analyze them, choose the one you want to do, cut that one out, and have it somewhere available to you that you can see it like taped right next to your drawing, so that you can use it as a reference when you're resizing it onto the larger white drawing paper. So go ahead and do your thumbnails on a big piece of newsprint like this and cut out the one you chose. Or if you don't want to cut your paper, you can always simply fold it to the one you're going to use, okay? You just don't want to confuse yourself by having all the different ones. And make sure that you solidified where you have the lines. So if you decide that you want to make it a little bit more wide, like a little bit more negative space on one side or the other, you have something touching and you want to, be sure to make that line very clear in your thumbnail. Don't think that you can just kind of remember to nudge something over when you do the larger one, because it just never happens. You're going to need to make all those decisions and make it a very clear map for yourself in the thumbnail stage. Okay, so what is the next step? You guys should know this. The next step is going to be your picture plane, okay? So for speed and demo purposes, I just have a template for my picture plane, just like I use a template for my thumbnails. It just makes it a little bit easier. Let me just get this. Put that picture plane and have it ready to go. It's always an option for you too if you want to save a little time. Okay, so it's very important to have that picture plane, because we need to know what's going to be contained within this drawing. We don't just kind of start a drawing from the middle and go out and put the picture plane afterwards. That's not going to teach us how to compose with that space. So you want to be very clear. Okay, so let's see what I'm looking at. Okay, so this is a view. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger, I think. This is the view of my still life today, and it's got some interesting different kinds of objects, and you'll find out why. So I'm showing you an image of me looking through the picture plane, of my viewfinder. Because when you do those thumbnails, that's how you should be framing your drawing, so you're looking through it while you're drawing those thumbnails. And it's also very helpful in the beginning stages if you need to also do that when you're starting your drawing. Anytime you're kind of confused about where those lines are in your work, where the boundaries are, this can be your friend, okay? So once you put down that picture plane, we're going to go on to something that is a little bit new for you, envelope or notations. Now, this is an extra step that I think is very helpful before you do your gesture, actually. And all that is, all an envelope is kind of doing a line kind of around the general area of all of the positive space, meaning all of the objects. So, for instance, and let me put on my drawing camera so you guys can start to check this out. So you can go ahead and create this kind of shape. It's just the outside, in a way, of all your objects. And I know this is very light. Try and make it a little darker. So it's like putting it in an envelope, so to speak. So you have an idea, you know, a target that you're going to hit these things with. Another way of doing it is notations, where you just kind of notate maybe the top of something, like the top of that leaf on the top right. I'll put a little note, and then maybe the bottom of that particular vase, and then go down kind of the bottom of where that bowl is, and then the side maybe of where that sphere is. So this is going to help me size things to make them as similar as possible to what I'm looking at. So it's just doing it really, really lightly and kind of creating this kind of target zone where you're going to be doing your drawing. Okay, so give that a try. It might make it a little bit easier when you get to the next stage, which is gesture. You guys have done that before. We use our sketching grip. Don't be way up here in your holding your pencil. Come back a little bit, loosen up those fingers. You don't have to hold super tightly. And this is when you start to kind of get a general idea of where objects are in your picture plane. Making corrections as you go. It's really just like creating these little squiggly lines. Make this a little bit bigger. You guys can see what I'm doing. Creating these squiggly lines where objects are in space. So I have this space in here. There's a bowl. There's no detail, there's no refining yet. You're just kind of making those little decisions as you go. So kind of a leaf coming down here. And I can kind of see this kind of weird. So excuse me while I kind of work that out. Okay, so it's kind of crazy, but you do have an idea of where everything is now. And that's what gesture is all about. It's just kind of figuring out where things are located. So you're thinking about placement first, okay? So our next step is going to go into a little bit more detail and more refining. So we do placement first, where I want these objects to be within my picture plane, and then we start thinking about proportion, okay? So the only way for our eyes to really see proportion is to give ourselves some measurable visual ways to do it. So this is when you start with those vertical and horizontal organizational lines. Organizational lines are the ones where you're basically drawing across the top of all your objects and the bottom of your objects. So I'm going to do the top of that sphere, and I'm going all the way across because that will give us a reference to where the top of that ball, if there was a line, where it would hit on the plant. Okay? And the same thing with the sides of all your objects. So I'm just kind of hand drawing these. Okay, so I'm doing the sides of that, and then I have this, and you're kind of always kind of keeping an eye on correcting as you go. So now I'm going to put a line on either side of the plant pot, and I'm taking it all the way down, even through objects. Remember, everything is kind of see-through. This is giving us more and more of a grid that's going to help us see what we need to. So I'm thinking this sphere is, I think that this is a little bit lower, so I'm going to lower that. So if you have a siding line that, you know, is going to kind of confuse you, if you've made a change, you can take those out, because there, I think that's where I want the bowl to be, and then I'm looking like this is actually a little bit higher, where the little base for the sphere is, and then that makes the sphere a little bit bigger. So I'm going to move. So as you can see, everything is flexible. You can make all of these changes as you go. As you know better, you make it better. Okay? So this is further kind of refining the proportions a little bit in relationship to each other. So here you have the top of my bowl, and if I do a line through it, where is it going to hit? So now I have these lines and I see where they hit, okay? So now I can compare that to my drawing, okay? So the last organizational line that's always really helpful is the center line, but I sometimes wait until I'm kind of shifting around a little bit proportion and placement wise until I do that, and that will help me make the object symmetrical. So I'm not having to keep moving that center line on top of everything else. So that's the only organizational line to kind of wait. So let's go ahead and go to step 6, which is going to be those siding lines. Now, basically, you're correcting a lot of your organizational lines and you're using them to help you see, hence siding lines. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of these measurements and I'm going to put it in red so you can see, and I'm going to use something to make it a little bit more clear. So this is where I'm from my initial drawing, that I think the top of that bowl is. So now we get to find out, is it right? So this is how you do it. So the first thing I'm going to do is make a nice red line that you guys can see, okay, where I think the top of that white bowl in the front is, okay? So now I'm going to duplicate that line visually by holding up my siding stick, turning it horizontal, and recreating that line, kind of squinting and putting it where the top of that bowl is. Now, because the bowl is below my eye line is where your eyes are in space and compared. So if the object is below your eye line, if the ellipse is below your eye line, it's going to be larger. If it's above, it's going to be larger. And if it's head on, so remember before, if you're looking at something like this, if you're looking head on, let me get it right, head on to an ellipse, if your eye line is on the same level as an ellipse, such as the ellipse on top of a bowl, it's going to be almost, if it's exactly on your eye line, it's going to be a straight line. But if it's below your eye line, then it's going to look more like this. If it's more, if your eyes are actually further above it, it gets even bigger until you're looking straight down at it and it becomes a complete circle. So the same thing, so it's all about where your eyes are. Your viewpoint really matters in your drawing. So once again, if you're looking, if my eye was at the same level as the top of that bowl, then I would only see a straight line. Let me get this straight again. Okay? All right, so, but that's not the case. So since I'm doing that, what I'm going to have to do is two lines, one at the bottom of the ellipse and one at the top is what I'm going to do. So this, I'm going to say, is at the top of the ellipse. Okay? So I'm going to put my sighting stick up like so and visually put it to the top, which is really the back part of that ellipse. And I'm going to squint and I'm going to look left and right. I'm going to look across that line and see where it hits on the other objects and see if it's the same in my drawing. Okay? So all I'm doing is creating the same line twice. One on my drawing and the other one with my sighting stick and placing it in my view exactly in the same place as the line on my drawing. And I'm comparing. So looking at that, I'm beginning to learn ways to change my drawing. Okay? So let me get a darker pencil. So now I know that if I drew a line across that top, the highest point of that bowl, it's going to hit basically in the same place. It's going to hit right here. It's about a fourth of this distance of the height of that pot right next to it. Okay? So I'm just kind of comparing where this line is in real life using my sighting stick and comparing that to my drawing. Another thing I can do is see where it's hitting on this side. Okay? So I can kind of look and see where it's hitting. So now I see that that sphere is much further back than I thought, because on my drawing it's not too far away from midpoint. Look at that. But in real life when I do it, it's at the bottom third of this, so it's down here on in real life. So what does that tell me? I got to move that up. Okay, so let me look again. So I can put notation that that's the bottom of the sphere, and this is the bottom of the base the sphere is on. So that's where the sphere actually starts. So isn't that interesting? So now I know that the sphere is much higher. And all of that came from one line. That's a lot of information just from one line. So let's try another line and see what we can do. So let's see with that. So we can take the measurement of the width of the bowl. Now I can look at that bowl and tell that it's wider. I think it's wider than it is tall. And right now, my drawing, it almost looks like it's taller than it is wide. So that means it's too narrow, it's too skinny. So let's fix that. So take the shortest measurement. I'm comparing the two. And it looks like the height is the shortest measurement. Okay? So if this is the top of my bowl, and this is where I think the bottom is. Let's draw a line, make it a little bit darker. All right, so that's what I think is the height of my drawing. Oh, sorry, of my, yes, my whole drawing, no, of the bowl. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to recreate with my siding stick that height. And when you do this kind of measurement, what you do is you put the top of your stick at the top of your measurement, or at one side, depending if it's vertical or horizontal, and just bring your thumb down to hold the place of whatever the length is. So I'm going to go down, put it at the top, and put this down at the bottom. Okay, so there's the height. So I have the line here, and I have the line right here, right? Now, I'm going to turn it sideways. Now, before I go on, I am going to tell you this. You need to do this siding and measuring with a straight arm. And the reason for that is that way it's always, oh wow, look how big my hand looks. It always is the same distance away from you. The only reason why I'm using a bent arm is so that you can see in my little window. So go ahead and take that height. So I have the same line here that I do on my drawing, and now I'm going to flip and check that and see how many times this line, this length, which is the height, will fit in the width of my bowl. So I'm going to put it at the top and then turn it horizontal, and then I'm going to put this on the tip on the left side of the bowl, and wow, so it can fit 1 and almost like an eighth. So it's not much, all that much wider than it is tall. And right now I have it taller than it is wide. So that's a lot of information from one line. So if I look here, and I still kind of want to keep, like, this is what I think I'd like that height to be. It looks right in relation to the other objects. I'm going to recreate that. Actually, it's not as off as I thought it was. So sometimes I have to switch hands. And it's just a little bit more, so I can make it just a little bit wider. So it was closer than I thought. Okay. So now I can begin to sketch out. Now, I'm just sketching in this red so you can see it. I probably should switch back to this so you don't get confused between siding lines and... Now, normally you wouldn't allow your lines to be this dark this early on, but I want you guys to be able to see. So keep it light, keep it flexible, so it would be really easy to kind of take things down with your kneaded eraser and move things around still. Okay? So now I have the main element of this bowl, not including the ellipse, pretty accurate. It's proportional with itself. Okay? The next step I might try to do is get that ellipse going in there. I'm just going to sketch it out. Let's take that top off a little bit. Something like that. And that's kind of your first shot. You know, it's a little off. It's always going to be. And you can take it down a little bit. Again, I'm just drawing this heavy so you guys can see. Okay, so now you have your bowl kind of in proportion. You know where things are. Okay, so I'm not going to worry about boxing this ellipse until I've done the same thing for all of the others. So there's a lot of lines I can do, a lot of siding lines I can play around with. So for instance, you can do something like a line that goes across the top of the pot the plant is in. So this is where I think that is. Okay, so that's where I think that top of the planter is. So that's looking okay to me. And then I'm going to look at where the line that I think the bottom of it is. So this is the bottom of your pot. And where does it hit? So you follow it and see where it hits on something else. So in this case, it's hitting right here on my bowl. So that is, it's almost the middle. It's almost the middle, maybe a little further down from the middle. So once again, you do a line here, you can check it. So I'm going to check it by sighting and measuring it. So I'm going to put that line on the bottom. So it's sitting right there on the bottom visually of the plant pot, and I'm going to see where it hits. And it's hitting in about the same place. So that's good. That's one less thing to move, right? I can do the same thing with that line on top of where I think that pot is going to be. This is the top, the front part of the ellipse. And visually see where it hits the sphere, let's say. And it's about right now that I've moved up my sphere. So that's good. And here's a good thing. You can, now that you have that line, when I put this line up here, at this particular one, it's also hitting other things. So it's also hitting a leaf that's coming in the bowl, and it's hitting it at the top third of a leaf. So it's almost like graphing something, because you're getting all these grid lines. So I now know that this little leaf is right there, and then it has another leaf up here. Maybe it's a little bit bigger. So I'm already learning where other things are just from these few lines. So if you keep making all of these lines, there'll be something to learn from every one of them. So you put the sides of this bowl, since I'm now kind of okay with where that bowl is. And that's going to tell you some interesting things, because these lines come up and they hit all sorts of things. I'll be able to see where it hits as it goes up into all of those leaves, and where it intersects leaves. And that will help me with the placement of all my different leaves. This line on the other side is going to show me where it hits down here, as well as up here on the sphere. Is it in the middle? It's almost in the middle of the sphere. Let's check that. So I'm going to check again. You duplicate the line with your sighting stick, and yeah, it's a little bit to the right. It's not of center. So that would mean that needs to be a little bit smaller and come over a little bit, so that it's not quite centered. So every single line you do is giving you information, because you're just seeing what else they hit other than where you're putting it. So it's the same idea with anything. The more lines you have up, if I put the line of where I think the top of this sphere is, which obviously is too big, that's why I'm having issue with it, because it's lower than the plants. And it's up here. So now I have a more accurate measurement of the height of my sphere. Well, that's really great information, because what is sphere, the height and the width are the same. So then I can just recreate, I can check this line. If this is with putting my finger, just like I do when I hold it up as well, my fingers. So if this is where I think the top should be, and this is where I think the bottom, that's the whole height length. That's also going to be its width. Okay? So it's going to come over. It's not fitting that great on my picture plane, so now I know probably my objects are a little on the big side. So now I know that is the width. So let me draw a line. I'm going to find the center, or close to it, and draw that width that I now know about. Bring that down. So that is the width of my sphere, okay? So now let's move on to kind of a little bit more of the refinement. Now that I have the height and width of my sphere, and again, go ahead and take these lines all the way across because they're going to help you. Because you can put a line on the top of that sphere and see where it hits every little leaf and know where they are. Are they above the line? Are they below the line? It's going to help you. So go ahead and draw these all the way across. Okay. And I'm doing basically a box around. Make that a little bit darker. This is almost need a different color so you guys can see. And this is coming in a little bit. It's a little close to the picture plane for me, but okay. So let me use something a little easier to see so you can see what I'm doing. Yeah, I'm going to differentiate it with something. That didn't help. Let's see. So I'm going to use black. Do not use a big black marker on your drawing, but I want you to be able to see that. You can see. Okay. You wouldn't use that big black marker because you do want things to remain fairly flexible. So this would normally just be done in some sort of pencil. So I'm going to double check, see if the width and the height is the same. Okay, so we're good there. And I'm going to go ahead and darken these so you can see them. Kind of eyeball the middle a little bit. Let that come down just a little bit. I think that's a little bit more even. Okay, so already have a good sense of the shape and the placement. And now we're just going to refine. So this is after you've already sighted and measured and gotten the placement and the proportion of all your objects. So this is when you're beginning to refine. Once again, you're not doing this in a big black marker, but I want you guys to be able to see. Let me find my ebony. So now you can find a couple of things. You can make quick little measurements of where the most accurate side is in relationship. Let's say I want it to come in this much. I can make a notation and I can actually measure that. Okay. A little tricky. So I can do that for every one of these. So there, there. Make sure they're all the same. Let's see. Okay. All right. I think this one got a little bit long. Don't be afraid to double check measurements. You know, fingers move, the paper moves. Oh, I'm so glad I did too. That was really off. Okay. So that and that. So that one was off. Okay. So now you have little notations for the corners, and then it's just a matter of making either side of this line look the same. Just like in a bottle that you put a center line down, anytime you have a line where your eye can go back and forth and compare one side to the other, it makes it easier for you to go ahead and more accurately describe this. Now, here's a good tip. If it looks like it's starting to go over like that, that means that this is just a little bit too close to the corner. So here's another adjustment. You just keep kind of everything really flexible. You don't completely erase, just take it down a little bit if you need to. So now I know that this needs to come down. And this is where my original drawing was. But it needs to come down more because it's not a very nice natural curve. We're going to hand draw all our spheres and ellipses. So guides that help you do that. Okay. Having a little trouble with this because I'm drawing at a really strange angle for me. And you can kind of keep refining it until it looks the same on either side of your lines, okay? You just further refine it, okay? So that's just like what you do with your ellipses. So you have your ellipse. I'm going to darken it so you see. And you can keep losing my pencil. You can then do the same thing. Box that ellipse. Okay. Let's see if I can find another color marker. I'll have to stick with black. Okay. So let me make this a little darker. Most of you seem like you got the hang of this, so I'm just going to do it really quickly. Find that middle. Find that middle. So you have to ignore any siding lines that might be in your way. Again, you're not going to be doing this with a marker. And now I can compare. So once again, anytime you have a center line, you can compare what's on either side of it much more easily. So it helps you see like so. Okay, and you can continue to refine it. And then you can correct your ellipses. Beware of that little point on the side. And obviously if you were doing this with a really light pencil, you could then erase this down, which is hard to do with an ebony pencil. You can erase that down, and then I'm going to use red for demonstration purposes, but you erase it down, and then you can kind of find the line you're most happy with. Comparing one side of the line to the other, just to clarify it for yourself. Because you'll have a lot of little lines and you want to kind of make sure you know which one is right. And then you have a much more accurate ellipse. So you won't have these lines in big, bold, and black, but you will have them, and keep them visual. This is kind of, it's like almost a technical drawing, a learning drawing. You're keeping all the infrastructure visible. Okay, and then our next one, we get to do value and work in different mediums like charcoal and all of that fun stuff. But this time I just wanted you to kind of practice getting your proportions, using the tool of sighting and measuring, okay? And getting good at your placement and having control over that instead of kind of not being able to kind of fit things in your picture plane where you actually want them to be. Now, the last thing I'm going to review about sighting and measuring is sighting and measuring of angles. Now, this is great if you have something with angles such as a box, you can use it in this way, and also you can create any angles as well if they don't actually exist in real life. So, and by that I mean, let's say we can create an angle that goes from the top of that sphere to, let's just put it to the top edge of that pot in the back that has the plant. Okay? So I'm going to make it in my drawing first. So that actually should be where that kind of front top of this pot, I'm already learning that it needs to go over a little bit. Every line you make, you learn a lot from. Okay, so that's the line that goes from that front of the top to the top of the sphere. So the next step, check it in real life, and there's two ways to do this. The first way is the way I've shown you before, where you duplicate the line. So I'm duplicating that angled line from the top of the sphere to the front of that pot. And then you bring it down. Okay, so I start here and I try not to change the way my hand is holding that angle, and you bring it down and you compare it to here, okay? And see if it's the same. Now another way to do it, and this is kind of a new to you way of doing it, is the clock method, okay? So if you think of a clock, 12, 1, 2, 3, 3 is straight across, 4, 5, 6 is straight up and down again, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, straight up and down again. Some people that kind of helps them, you know, if you have trouble holding your hand in the position. So when I hold this up, it's kind of like it's 10 o'clock. So it's the angle that kind of looks like if this is 12, 11, 10 o'clock. Okay? And if that helps you, 12, 11, 10 o'clock, to kind of be able to recreate that angle so that you can compare them, give it a shot so you can see if that works for you, okay? Either way works fine, and it helps you find your placement. So that seems to be hitting where it should on my pot, but if it didn't, then I'd know I need to move it over or what have you, because you can kind of see everything it hits. And once again, if I put it back up there, that same angle, I can also look and see where it hits other things. It goes across my pot, and then it takes the tip of a leaf. So once again, I'm figuring out where those leaves are just from these lines, so I'll know where they kind of are located in space. Something that seems very organic and kind of hard, you know, is to box or whatever you're doing, just using that diagonal and seeing what it hits and where it hits them, okay, can make such a big difference. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk to you about in terms of the steps is going to be negative shapes, all right? So we've talked about it before, okay, and I'm just kind of looking. So let's talk a little bit about negative shapes. So obviously your negative shapes are the areas within your picture plane that don't that aren't the objects. Basically, your objects are your positive space, and the space around and in between them is your negative space. Okay, so I've already had you guys practice filling in your thumbnails the negative space. Remember doing that. So you don't need to do that for your drawing, but you're welcome to do that for all your thumbnails because it's a very helpful tool. But another way you can use that negative space is that just like you can measure an object, you can measure negative space. And the way you do that is kind of converting these empty areas into measurable shapes. Okay? This is also going to help you when we start doing value and seeing value, to be able to break something down into shapes. So I'll stick with my red pencil. So let's find an area of negative space that we can use. So we have a lot going on here. So let me see if I can find a shape. So it's kind of good to use for that. So I will start with something over here since it's already filled in. So let's basically, you can take that negative space from the picture plane or from one of your objects. Let's start with one of your objects, right? And we're going to create a little visual path. So this is the top of my sphere, and I can kind of go across the sphere and down and maybe cut across and see where it hits. And that's contained into my picture plane. So I went across, and you can kind of create a little piece, or if it's more complicated still life, there'll be a little bit more spaces in between you can work with. So let's color that in with something. See if that shows up. Okay. So I'm going to fill that negative space in. Okay. So now I have this shape that's measurable, so I can kind of compare a measurement. So let's compare something like from the top of my picture plane to the top of my sphere. So that's okay. So that is about this measurement. Okay, I can compare it to any measurement. Let's see, something kind of similar. I'm going to use the space between the top back of this bowl, and I'm already seeing that it's going to be useful, to the top of my pot. So I'm going to put it on the top of my bowl, top of my pot, and I'm going to make a little notation. Of how long that is. Okay. Well, this is almost the opposite because I measured it to the top of the pot before the ellipse starts, so the front of the pot. So is that correct? Well, let's find out. You take your sighting stick. And I'm going to look through my viewfinder. Look through my viewfinder. Because you need to make sure you have that top picture plane line in the same place as when you first were doing that thumbnail and beginning this drawing. And I'm going to put it on the top visually of that picture plane and put my thumb down to where I hit the top of my sphere. And I'm going to compare it to this measurement right here. So then I'm going to compare it to the top of the back of that top bowl, the back of the ellipse of the bowl through here. Well, that's interesting. It's just a little bit less. So if that's the case, and that's the bottom, once again, let me double check. So put my thumb and forefinger to make the measurement and bring it down here. So according to looking at it in real life, it's just a little bit less. That's where the top of that bowl is when you're talking about the front of the ellipse. So guess what? I gotta move that ellipse and that plant pot over. It's much higher than I thought it was. It means the whole thing is bigger. Is this making sense? So using your negative space, and you can also just kind of visualize and compare. If you have kind of an interesting little negative space between objects, that shape of it, it's very helpful around an organic kind of shape like that, because I can see, does it look like a little triangle like that between that and the picture plane? If it doesn't, if it looks like a different shape, if it's, you know, much wider or something, I can kind of tell that I've moved something over. So it seems a little awkward and clunky at first to do things this way, but you'll get so much faster at it and become really natural. Just be kind of like doing this while you're drawing, checking things, checking them again. You'll get much faster. But just like, you know, the first time you strum a chord on a guitar, you're going to have to practice it. And then it becomes second nature, and it makes more sense. This visual comparisons in order to find the placement and proportions of your objects in your picture plane have become much more natural, okay? So all right, so basically you're going to be doing the same process minus the black marker and the highlighting pen, but the same process on your project one, okay? So what I'd like you to do is use that light pencil for your gesture, for all your adjustments, so they're all very light, taking them down slightly with that kneaded eraser so that you can still see them, but they're not confusing you, and they're taken down enough that they become that pentimenti. And then go ahead and keep refining with your organizational lines, your sighting and measuring lines. Don't forget those center lines. When I finally figure out like the exact shape of this, and it looks like it's going to have to be wider, so I'm going to have to compare it between this bowl and see which is wider in real life, okay, with my sighting stick. But once I have that solidified, then you can go, and one of the last little things you can do is, while it's still flexible, while you're still using the light pencil, put that middle center line, and once again it's another line that you take all the way because it can be useful with figuring out where all of my leaves are going to go. And yes, I'm now drawing in red pencil. Do not do your drawing in red pencil. Where my leaves are going to go, but also help me by having that center line so I can compare one side to the other visually to get it as symmetrical as possible. And that's that finishing touch. So you're going to do all of that in your really, really light pencil, and keep it light and keep it flexible and make all these little adjustments. You're just kind of nudging everything around until you finally have it as accurate. And if you follow these steps one by one, it's going to gradually bring you to a much more proportioned, well compositioned drawing, much more accurate drawing, and you'll be much more confident because you'll have that skill to, no matter what is in front of you, to measure its height and its width and compare and do these lines going across, you know, and saying, okay, where does that line hit the other objects in my scene? Where does this line hit the other objects? And adjusting everything around, you'll get much faster at it as you practice it. And all of this will be just some easy little step that you do before you continue on with your drawing with value or whatever you're doing. So you're doing it all in light pencil until the very, very end, okay? And all the actual objects are in light pencil. You can use your red pencil or a colored pencil to put your siding lines. That does not bother me in this because it's a learning drawing and I want to see your work. And I think it kind of helps you to see what's going on a little bit. But I do recommend a pencil of sorts, even though it's colored, so that it's, you know, something you can kind of take down if you really need to, a little bit. But then, when you have all of it done, you can kind of lighten it. You're not going to erase it. I want to see the pentimenti. I want to see your work. I want to see all your organizational lines and siding lines. Then, the very last stage is when you have it completely where you want it to be. That's when you finally take that nice darkest pencil you have, graphite pencil, and you carefully do that contour around all of your objects and just clarify. Show me which lines you have chosen from all of the pentimenti lines. The exact line that you want me to see is your choice of where you feel like that object is. So it's kind of like inking something. If you guys in animation or cartoons, it's inking. It's that final step. Okay, so don't do it until you feel like you've gone through all of the steps, you've double checked, and you feel really good about how it looks. Put it up on a wall, which I highly recommend, because it's a little unnatural for me to be drawing on the table because I'm usually drawing with an easel or up on a wall. I think you just see it sometimes a little bit better. You see distortions you don't see when you're drawing at this angle and things aren't at your eye level. So I highly recommend before you do that final outline of everything, you're finishing part of it while it's still flexible and in that light pencil stage. Tape it up on the wall. Take it out of the pad. Don't draw it on the pad. Take it out and tape it or tack it onto the wall and stand back and just stare. Stare at it. Look at everything. Does something look weird? Does something not make sense? Does something not look like your still life? You know, keep in mind, you know, check things like if you were standing up or sitting in a higher chair when you started drawing and then you kind of slouched down, your eye view was, your eye level changed, well, guess what? All your ellipses change in size. So if you draw one object like this bowl while you're sitting up straight, and then the second one you draw while you're kind of slouching down, well, what's going to happen? Your eye level changes, and so will that, and it won't make sense. It'll look like you have two viewpoints in one drawing. So a lot of that can be caught if you put it up on the wall and stand back and kind of look at it and see if everything makes sense. And then if you feel happy and you can make little adjustments and everything, put that line with the dark pencil and you'll have an accurate, clear drawing with all your decisions and all your steps in the process visible. And it'll be a great kind of way to remember all of the different steps that you did in this drawing. It'll be something you can go back to and remind yourself when we get lost in doing things like value and you know, Conte crayon drawings and all of that, that you can always come back to this. If you're having trouble drawing something, you can go, oh yeah, I can box that crazy weird shape or ellipse. I can sight and measure things and figure out what things are. Even if it's just flowing fabric, I can say, okay, this crease, and if I do a line across where that crease is, where does it hit the other creases in the fabric? It's going to be an invaluable tool, and we'll be using these steps throughout this course, okay? So practice it. Just draw things in your sketchbook and then practice adjusting them into proper proportions with each other, and you'll get better. It'll be much faster. Okay, so I'm going to go over the steps one more time. So just in case, thumbnails and composition on newsprint, picture plane on your white paper, envelope or notations, just creating that outline around all of your positive space so you see where it's sitting within the picture plane. Gesture, loosely looking at your still life more than you're looking at your drawing, so every 2 seconds, look up, make sure you're drawing what you see and instead of what you're trying to memorize. Your memory is very inaccurate, so keep looking up and drawing what you see. Vertical and horizontal organizational lines, lines on either side of objects, top and bottom of objects. Your sighting lines that extend all the way across, comparing how many times the shorter length of an object, whether it's the height or the width, will fit into the longer width. So if something is taller than is wide, then you take the smallest measurement first, like the width, and then go visually check it from the top all the way down how many times that width fits in there. And that way you can make sure an object is in the correct proportion, and then you can start comparing it, and you have these lines going out in that grid that will help you. And don't forget diagonal lines, you can create them, tops of objects, cutting across in different ways. Where do these lines hit? They're like arrows. Where are they going to hit? What objects are they going to hit? How are they going to create things like, oh, I don't know, negative shapes? So think about converting some of these empty negative space into shapes so that you can compare the shape and visually see that shape on your drawing and compare it to what you're looking at. Okay, so with that, I always recommend using your viewfinder because it's really hard to imagine that picture plane line, okay, and how it's enclosing something in. So put it back where it was when you were doing those initial thumbnails, and so that you can really visually see it and see those negative shapes and compare them to the negative shapes that you have in your drawing. Okay, so all of these steps, you know, and then of course lastly putting that center line. You have to put those center lines or you can't see those center lines, so you compare one side to another to get everything symmetrical. And you get your ellipses boxed, your spheres boxed if you have one in your still life, and outline everything. Okay, I hope this helps you guys. I know it was very thorough. If you have any questions, we'll have time for that before into class. Okay, all right, thank you.